Welcome to this comprehensive breakdown of the July 2026 UPSC curriculum update. In this session, we walk through 5 high-focus core topics that every serious aspirant must master to stay ahead in the current examination cycle. The curriculum spans General Studies Paper 2, General Studies Paper 3, and the Essay Paper, offering a strategic mix of international relations, environmental governance, and political philosophy for comprehensive preparation. The first segment examines the evolving India-Japan strategic partnership, including the landmark July 2026 summit and the Quad dilemma. The second segment analyzes India's multi-domain competition with China, covering maritime flashpoints, supply chain sovereignty, and sub-regional integration strategies. The third segment addresses Asiatic lion conservation, exploring single-site extinction risks and the 13-year delay in implementing the Supreme Court's Translocation order. The fourth segment evaluates marine and dairy ecosystem degradation, focusing on benthic destruction, mechanized trawling impacts, and climate-induced heat stress effects on agriculture. The fifth segment dissects the philosophical foundations of universal human rights, tracing the 1776 Declaration's impact on global constitutional thought. Each topic has been selected for its high probability of appearing in both preliminary and mains examinations based on current relevance and syllabus weightage. Stay focused, take detailed notes, and prepare to gain a decisive edge in your preparation through systematic analysis. Let us begin this analytical journey through the most pressing issues defining the contemporary UPSC syllabus and examination requirements. Segment 1: India-Japan Strategic Ties. News context and geopolitical realignment. The India-Japan bilateral relationship has entered a transformative phase following the landmark July 2026 state visit of Japanese Prime Minister Sane Takaichi to New Delhi. This summit marks a critical milestone, signaling both nations' commitment to insulating their strategic partnership from volatile multilateral shifts that have characterized recent global geopolitics. The core context revolves around what experts term the Quad dilemma, a growing friction arising from the United States' diminishing enthusiasm for the Quad framework and its gradual shift away from Indo-Pacific terminology in active diplomatic vocabulary and strategic communications. Both India and Japan have consciously adopted a sovereign decoupling strategy, choosing to ring-fence their bilateral agreements from unpredictable global power dynamics that could otherwise derail long-term cooperation. This ensures that strategic cooperation in defense, technology, and maritime security remains unaffected by changes in third-party policy positions or electoral outcomes in other capitals. For UPSC aspirants, this topic is essential under General Studies Paper 2, specifically within bilateral, regional, and global groupings involving India. Understanding how shifting policies of developed countries directly impact India's core national interests is crucial for writing high-scoring answers that demonstrate analytical depth. The July 2026 summit thus represents both a diplomatic achievement and a strategic recalibration in an uncertain global environment requiring careful navigation. Securing the free and open Indo-Pacific posture. Building on the renewed bilateral momentum, India and Japan have signed 16 comprehensive accords designed to solidify an updated free and open Indo-Pacific posture for the contemporary security environment. These agreements represent a significant deepening of strategic cooperation, particularly in areas concerning energy resilience, supply chain security, and maritime domain awareness across the vast Indo-Pacific theater. A major joint statement on energy transport commits both nations to securing critical shipping routes across the Indo-Pacific, addressing common vulnerabilities exposed during recent West Asian conflicts and global supply disruptions that affected energy markets worldwide. The updated framework places substantial emphasis on protecting Gulf transit routes from unilateral disruptions, a lesson learned from acute shipping vulnerabilities that affected both nations' energy security calculations. This commitment is operationalized through what strategists call a maritime energy transport value chain, a coordinated system ensuring that vital energy lifelines remain stable and protected from geopolitical coercion. For examination purposes, candidates must remember that the 2026 FYP framework explicitly integrates energy security with traditional maritime defense, creating a comprehensive shield against supply chain blockages. The strategic insight is straightforward. Guaranteeing safe passage through the Indian Ocean and Gulf transit routes prevents unilateral coercion and stabilizes regional commerce for all stakeholders while maintaining rules-based international order. Advancing naval surveillance and managing maritime choke points. Naval cooperation has emerged as a cornerstone of the India-Japan partnership, with both nations agreeing to co-develop advanced platforms explicitly designed to enhance maritime domain awareness across contested waters. These coordinated domain awareness initiatives enable long-range ocean surveillance, allowing both countries to monitor critical maritime choke points with greater precision, coordination, and persistence. This capability is essential in a region where unilateral actions by competing powers continue to challenge the existing security architecture and established norms regarding freedom of navigation. The bilateral joint statement has officially raised serious concerns regarding actions aimed at altering the status quo in the South and East China Seas through coercive measures. Notably, Japanese officials have openly called for a peaceful resolution to the Taiwan issue during the summit, signaling a more assertive diplomatic posture that emphasizes stability and deterrence. Both nations must carefully navigate their complex relationships with China and the United States, maintaining a delicate strategic axis that prevents open conflict while safeguarding core sovereign interests. This balancing act requires sophisticated diplomatic calibration across multiple forums simultaneously. For aspirants, understanding the interplay between regional flashpoints and bilateral commitments is essential for tackling questions on India's evolving maritime security strategy and alliance management principles in an era of strategic competition. The Bay of Bengal Industrial Value Chain. The India-Japan partnership extends beyond traditional security cooperation into a comprehensive geoeconomic strategy centered on the Bay of Bengal region and its surrounding geography. Prime Minister Takaichi's strategic vision actively connects India's northeastern local economies with BIMSTEC as a primary institutional partner, creating a sub-regional alliance framework that enhances regional prosperity through targeted development cooperation and infrastructure investment. This integration is operationalized through cross-border infrastructure projects, exemplified by the Japanese-funded Matarbari deep-sea port in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. The underlying philosophy of this strategy is termed security through prosperity, the concept that constructing an integrated value chain creates a geoeconomic counterweight to external influence while simultaneously reinforcing internal border security in India's northeast region. By linking Japanese-funded projects in neighboring countries directly to Indian economic zones, both nations are building a resilient industrial corridor that promotes stability through shared economic growth and mutual interdependence. This regional logistics gateway approach transforms geographical proximity into strategic advantage, ensuring that the Bay of Bengal becomes a zone of cooperation rather than competition among regional powers. Mastering this geoeconomic linkage is essential for examination preparation and understanding contemporary Indian foreign policy doctrine emphasizing connectivity as a strategic tool. UPSC Value Addition and Mains Framework. For examination preparation, aspirants must master the ANSWER framework for questions related to the India-Japan partnership and Indo-Pacific stability from multiple analytical perspectives. A representative mains question asks candidates to assess the economic and security dimensions of this partnership in the context of regional power balance and evolving global order. The ideal introduction should highlight how India and Japan have consciously ring-fenced their bilateral alliance from unpredictable multilateral policies, establishing a model of sovereign strategic cooperation grounded in mutual interests and shared values. The first body paragraph should map out the newly established maritime energy transport value chain, detailing joint naval domain awareness initiatives and their implications for regional security architecture and energy security. The second body paragraph must address sub-regional integration of India's northeast via BIMSTEC, emphasizing the strategic linkage to Bangladesh's Matarbari port and Japanese official development assistance contributions to regional infrastructure. The conclusion should emphasize the strategic necessity of maintaining a multi-lined foreign policy to navigate global geopolitical shifts effectively without overdependence on any single partner. Additionally, candidates should practice a crucial prelims question regarding the updated FOIP framework that includes both a maritime energy transport value chain to protect Gulf transit lines and explicit positioning of BIMSTEC to connect Bangladesh and Northeast India, making the correct answer both 1 and 2. Segment 2, India-China Competition. Managing Regional Flashpoints in a Multipolar Asia. While the India-Japan partnership represents strategic alignment, the India-China relationship is defined by a highly volatile mix of persistent border tensions and multi-domain strategic competition across South Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific. This asymmetric rivalry extends far beyond traditional military domains, encompassing technological supremacy, economic influence, diplomatic positioning, and narrative control in international forums. China's rapidly expanding naval footprint across the Indian Ocean continuously challenges traditional regional balances, creating friction points across multiple geographies simultaneously. A particularly noteworthy development is the institutional pivot occurring in neighboring nations, where governments are restarting anti-communist patriotic classes for strategic graduates and security personnel. This educational restructuring ensures that future leaders possess a clear, long-term awareness of active security threats emanating from geopolitical competition and ideological contestation in the region. For UPSC preparation, this evolving dynamic directly impacts the study of India and its neighborhood relations, illustrating how foreign policies of competing global powers actively shape and affect India's sovereign interests. Understanding these multi-domain flashpoints is essential for crafting nuanced answers on regional security architecture, alliance politics, and India's strategic autonomy in an increasingly contested neighborhood environment requiring careful diplomatic management and economic statecraft. Naval power projection and joint exercises. The maritime dimension of the India-China competition has intensified significantly, with China rapidly advancing its blue water strategy focused on securing key regional energy lanes and strategic sea lines of communication. This ambition is clearly illustrated by China's pursuit of rapid infrastructure partnerships located near critical global trade corridors, accelerating what strategists term the blue water race in the Indo-Pacific region. These efforts aim to establish permanent Chinese naval presence in areas traditionally dominated by other regional powers and protected by established maritime norms. To effectively counter these unilateral naval expansions, opposing regional partnerships are actively establishing counter-encirclement accords through bilateral and minilateral frameworks involving multiple partners. A primary tactic involves setting up joint maritime patrols across highly sensitive and contested areas of the Pacific Ocean, creating a network of coordinated security operations. The hardening of these regional security blocks is further highlighted by the deployment of annual joint naval drills off peripheral coasts, including exercises involving Quad partners and other friendly nations committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific. These strategic exercises serve as a visible deterrent and demonstrate the escalating militarization defining the current Asian geopolitical theater. For examination purposes, aspirants must understand that joint naval exercises represent concrete commitments to collective maritime security. The geoeconomic battle for the Bay of Bengal. The competition between India and China has evolved into a full-scale geoeconomic battle, particularly in the infrastructure domain across South Asia and the Indian Ocean region. China's aggressive deep-sea port investments present a persistent and severe strategic challenge to regional stability and balance of power in this critical maritime space. These investments directly threaten India's traditional and historical role as the primary security provider in the Indian Ocean region, creating a complex web of economic dependencies that have far-reaching strategic implications for New Delhi's policy calculations. In response, India is accelerating a comprehensive counter-strategy focused on geoeconomics, with the core plan involving the rapid development of cross-border industrial chains and connectivity corridors linking the subcontinent. This strategy links domestic production hubs directly with strategic, allied infrastructure, such as the Japanese-backed Matarbari port in Bangladesh and various connectivity projects in Myanmar and Sri Lanka. To solidify this approach, India is maximizing the utility of sub-regional bodies like BIMSTEC, leveraging these institutions to lock in vital economic and security partnerships with immediate neighbors. This institutional alignment ensures that local supply lines remain resilient against external dominance, creating a sustainable framework for regional cooperation that counters unilateral influence effectively through collective mechanisms. De-risking strategic component manufacturing. Beyond maritime and infrastructure competition, India faces an urgent and critical need to rapidly expand domestic refined industrial capacities to achieve technology sovereignty and strategic autonomy in the contemporary global order. The current heavy dependence on external technology components and raw minerals leaves India's clean energy, telecommunications, and industrial grids highly vulnerable to sudden cross-border supply shocks. This vulnerability is particularly acute in sectors requiring specialized inputs, rare earth materials, and semiconductor components essential for modern economic and defense applications. National policy must decisively shift away from retail trade models toward building self-reliant advanced processing capabilities inside India, protecting critical manufacturing from external leverage and potential weaponization of supply chains. The strategic target metric is ambitious. India must add 500,000 tons of refined copper capacity every 5 years to mitigate reliance on manufacturing imports and build domestic resilience against external pressures. This numerical benchmark is essential for aspirants to remember, as it represents a concrete policy goal that frequently appears in examination contexts related to critical mineral security and industrial self-reliance. Understanding the intersection of industrial policy, technology sovereignty, and supply chain resilience is crucial for tackling questions on economic security comprehensively. UPSC Notes and Mains Question Framework. For mains preparation, a critical 15-mark question asks candidates to evaluate how India's strategic response to China's regional dominance must combine robust blue-water naval coordination with the integration of cross-border industrial supply chains through sub-regional groupings like BIMSTEC. The answer should begin by establishing that the India-China competition is no longer merely a localized border dispute. It has fundamentally evolved into a structural, multi-domain contest spanning technology sovereignty, maritime access, and sub-regional infrastructure networks across the broader Asian theater. For interview preparation, candidates must articulate this structural shift clearly, demonstrating awareness of how economic statecraft complements traditional security measures in contemporary strategic thinking and policy formulation. A crucial prelims question tests knowledge of India's northeastern economic integration. India is building industrial value chains to link its northeast with the Japanese-backed Matarbari port in Bangladesh, making the correct answer option B. This question pattern emphasizes the importance of connecting sub-regional geography with broader strategic objectives and alliance frameworks. Mastering these frameworks ensures comprehensive preparation for both preliminary and mains examinations on this high-priority topic, with particular attention to the integration of security and development paradigms that define the contemporary Indian foreign policy approach. Segment 3. Asiatic Lion Translocation. Asiatic Lion Conservation and Kuno Translocation. The conservation narrative of the Asiatic lion represents one of India's greatest wildlife success stories, yet it simultaneously embodies a profound ecological paradox that demands urgent attention from policymakers. The species, scientifically known as Panthera leopersica, has recovered to approximately 891 individuals today, representing a remarkable achievement in global conservation history and demonstrating the success of dedicated protection efforts over decades. However, this numerical success masks a severe structural vulnerability. The entire global population is concentrated within a single, continuous landscape in Gujarat's Gir forest region. This single-site concentration creates what experts term a vulnerability paradox, where a thriving population remains one catastrophic event away from potential eradication through natural or anthropogenic causes. For UPSC preparation, this topic falls squarely under General Studies Paper 3, specifically addressing conservation, environmental impact assessment, and wildlife management frameworks that govern species protection in India. The case study of the Asiatic lion offers a unique lens through which aspirants can understand the intersection of ecological science, judicial intervention, and political resistance in modern environmental governance. The challenge before India is clear: how to transition from basic conservation success to genuine conservation security through strategic translocation to multiple viable habitats that ensure long-term species survival. Government research and single-site extinction. Decades of extensive research by the Wildlife Institute of India have consistently generated stark warnings regarding the Asiatic lion population and its precarious single-site status that poses systemic risks. These studies indicate that maintaining a single, geographically concentrated population leaves the species highly vulnerable to sudden eradication through stochastic events that could occur without warning. In a single-site habitat like the Gir forest, non-recurring catastrophic events pose an existential threat to the entire global population, creating unacceptable risk profiles for conservation planning and species survival. Major forest fires, severe regional droughts, localized prey base crashes, or sudden natural disasters have the potential to push the entire species toward extinction in a matter of days or weeks. To counter this vulnerability, modern conservation science strongly advocates for distributing endangered carnivores across multiple, geographically distinct habitats following the metapopulation approach. This strategy effectively diversifies ecological risk and builds long-term biological resilience against localized catastrophes that could otherwise eliminate entire populations. For examination purposes, aspirants must understand the scientific consensus clearly. Concentration equals vulnerability, and distribution equals resilience. The 2018 canine distemper virus outbreak tragically validated these theoretical concerns, demonstrating real-world consequences of concentration risk. Analyzing the Supreme Court Directive of 15 April 2013. The constitutional and ecological dimensions of this conservation crisis converged in a landmark judicial ruling on 15 April 2013 that continues to shape wildlife governance and conservation policy in India. On that date, The Supreme Court of India issued a directive to ensure the survival of the Asiatic lion, explicitly ordering the translocation of a batch of lions from Gujarat's Gir forest to Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh to create a viable secondary habitat. This ruling established a vital legal precedent for the intersection of conservation and constitutional principles. The judgment made clear that national conservation policy must be guided by objective ecological principles rather than regional political considerations or subnational claims of ownership over wildlife. The judiciary firmly affirmed that Asiatic lions constitute a national heritage, superseding state-level exclusivity claims and individual state preferences regarding species management. This principle of national heritage remains a cornerstone of conservation jurisprudence and federal relations regarding natural resources. However, despite Kuno National Park successfully preparing its habitat by relocating villages and restoring local prey bases, implementation has been stalled for 13 years entirely due to regional political disagreements. This delay highlights a severe political impasse in wildlife management that undermines scientific consensus and judicial authority. The canine distemper virus outbreak as a warning signal. The theoretical risks associated with single-site habitats became a harsh reality during the 2018 major outbreak of canine distemper virus in the Gir forest, providing empirical validation of long-standing scientific concerns about concentration risk. This episodic event killed several lions, illustrating how rapidly infectious diseases spread through dense, socially structured populations with limited genetic diversity and high contact rates. The outbreak served as a real-world validation of decades of scientific warnings about concentration risk, transforming abstract theoretical concerns into documented mortality figures that cannot be ignored. The vulnerability of the Asiatic lion is further exacerbated by a severe genetic choke point affecting the entire population and its adaptive capacity. Having recovered from a tiny genetic base in the early 20th century, the population exhibits dangerously low genetic diversity that compromises immune function and disease resistance. This genetic homogeneity makes their immune systems uniquely vulnerable to multiviral infections, compounding the disease transmission risk significantly across pride structures. Proposals to use Barda Wildlife Sanctuary as an alternative translocation site have been criticized by experts who argue they ignore the sufficient distance factor, the principle that secondary sites must be far enough away to prevent a single epidemic from simultaneously decimating both populations. UPSC Value Addition and Mains Framework. For UPSC preparation, the core paradigm shift required in wildlife management is moving away from basic numbers-based conservation toward advanced, resilience-oriented environmental governance frameworks that account for systemic risks. This conceptual evolution represents the key takeaway for General Studies Paper 3 and reflects global best practices in species protection and ecosystem management. The mains answer framework should begin by defining the ecological paradox of the Asiatic lion, a numerically thriving but ecologically fragile single-site wildlife population facing systemic risks from various potential catastrophe scenarios. The first body paragraph must detail the scientific consensus on disease vulnerability, citing the Wildlife Institute of India reports and the 2018 canine distemper virus outbreak as concrete evidence of systemic risk requiring immediate policy action. The second body paragraph should analyze the ongoing constitutional tension between objective national conservation priorities, as embodied in Supreme Court orders, and local political identity claims based on regional pride and economic interests. The conclusion must issue a strong call for the timely execution of the 2013 Supreme Court Translocation Plan to secure the species' long-term survival. For prelims, the 2013 directive designated Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh as the translocation site, making the correct answer option C. Subscribe for more structured analysis. Segment 4, Marine and Dairy Ecosystems. The structural degradation of inshore benthic environments. India's marine ecosystems face a structural crisis that existing data frameworks often fail to capture accurately in their reporting mechanisms and assessment methodologies. Domestic reports optimistically state that 91% of evaluated commercial fish stocks are stable, indicating a highly positive and sustainable outlook on local marine resource health that policymakers frequently cite in official communications. However, the Food and Agriculture Organization explicitly warns that India's inshore marine resources are fully exploited, currently hitting a dangerous production plateau that threatens future ecological stability and long-term productivity. This contradiction between domestic optimism and international warnings reveals significant gaps in assessment methodologies, indicator selection, and monitoring frameworks that govern marine resource management. Massive overcapacity exists within mechanized fishing fleets operating inside territorial waters, specifically within the 12 nautical mile zone reserved for traditional fishing activities under existing regulations. This unchecked expansion drives severe, structural degradation of fragile benthic, or seabed, environments, risking the marine ecosystem's foundational elements upon which all higher trophic levels depend. The inshore trap is essentially a capacity versus sustainability mismatch that traditional landing-based monitoring fails to address adequately. For examination purposes, aspirants must recognize the critical difference between landing statistics and actual ecosystem health indicators that capture true biological productivity and ecological resilience. Tracking the uncontrolled expansion of semi-industrial fleets. India's mechanized fishing sector has undergone rapid, uncontrolled expansion over recent decades, with the fleet swelling to over 64,411 vessels operating across coastal waters and territorial seas. The majority of these vessels operate with high-power engines without effective regulatory limits on new entries, creating a structural overcapacity that undermines ecological balance and resource sustainability in coastal ecosystems. This massive fleet heavily relies on bottom trawling gear, which continuously scrapes the shallow seabed, resulting in widespread benthic destruction across fishing grounds and nursery areas. This practice systematically destroys critical underwater marine life required for breeding, including commercially important species like shrimp and various finfish populations that support the livelihoods of millions. The rapid collapse of inshore ecosystems drives intense, localized resource conflicts as mechanized fleets increasingly encroach on traditional zones, directly threatening the livelihoods and economic survival of small-scale coastal communities who depend on these waters for sustenance. The critical ecological impact is clear. Bottom trawling destroys shallow benthic habitats, wiping out the breeding and feeding grounds essential for commercial species recovery and long-term fishery sustainability. For General Studies Paper 3, aspirants must understand how unregulated industrial expansion creates cascading ecological and social consequences. Evaluating land-sea inversions and infrastructure impacts. The degradation of marine ecosystems is not solely a maritime issue, it is heavily influenced by land-based infrastructure decisions that alter natural hydrological and ecological processes along the coast. The construction of extensive dam networks along major upstream rivers acts as a physical barrier, blocking essential land-based organic nutrients from entering and nourishing the coastal sea grid. This upstream alteration disrupts the natural land-sea nutrient transfer that historically sustained coastal productivity and supported diverse marine food webs. Compounding this nutrient loss is the continuing destruction of coastal mangrove forests due to aquaculture expansion and urbanization pressures along the coastline. The removal of these vital ecosystems eliminates the primary nursery habitats where countless marine species breed and mature, severely disrupting the marine life cycle and recruitment patterns. These structural drivers are exacerbated by significant enforcement lacuna in coastal regulatory frameworks. State agencies frequently lack the specialized patrol vessels and trained personnel required to effectively enforce existing regulations, such as the mandatory 5 nautical mile restriction zone specifically reserved for the protection of traditional fishers. This enforcement deficit allows regulatory frameworks to exist on paper while violations continue in practice, undermining conservation objectives and justice principles. Climate change and ecosystem impacts. The agricultural sector faces a severe heat stress crisis driven by rising temperatures and high humidity levels, often exceeding 70% during peak July and August months across the subcontinent. This climatic shift is severely impacting key agricultural and dairy regions across India, creating physiological stress on livestock and crops that threatens rural livelihoods and food security. The physiological impact on dairy animals is particularly significant for the rural economy. Lactating animals divert energy from milk production to regulate body temperature during periods of thermal stress. This energy reallocation causes a massive 20 to 30% drop in daily milk yields, directly affecting farmer incomes and national dairy supply chains that serve hundreds of millions of consumers. Breed vulnerability varies significantly across India's diverse cattle population, with buffaloes and crossbred cattle being highly vulnerable to heat stress due to their metabolic characteristics and high productivity demands. In contrast, indigenous breeds such as Sahiwal and Haryana show natural heat tolerance developed over generations, offering potential pathways for climate-resilient dairy farming through breed selection. For examination preparation, aspirants must understand the intersection of climate science, animal physiology, and agricultural policy. The differential vulnerability of breeds provides a clear framework for analyzing climate adaptation strategies. Transitioning to modern resilience-oriented management. To address ecosystem degradation comprehensively, policy must shift from simply maximizing landing volumes to an aged and oceanized management model that integrates local traditional fishers as active partners in governance. This conceptual evolution represents a fundamental reimagining of resource governance, moving from centralized control to collaborative stewardship arrangements that recognize local knowledge, traditional rights, and community participation. Modern ocean management mandates co-management frameworks, actively including local traditional fishers in patrolling and governance of coastal waters. Data collection methodologies must also evolve to support evidence-based policymaking and adaptive management. State agencies must transition CMFRI metrics away from basic, often inaccurate port landing tracking toward more reliable scientific methods that capture actual stock status. Instead, they must adopt direct scientific stock assessments conducted at sea to ensure accurate data on marine resources and ecosystem health. In the agricultural sector, climate-smart approaches require integrating evapotranspiration rates and heat indexes into regional farming early warning networks while actively supporting farmer-led initiatives focused on the conservation of climate-resilient indigenous breeds. These integrated approaches combine technological precision with traditional knowledge, creating resilient systems capable of adapting to environmental change. Segment 5: Universal Human Rights. Slide 22. The portability of the 1776 ideals across global revolutions. The 1776 Declaration of Independence represents one of history's most influential documents, with a legacy extending far beyond its original political context and geographical boundaries in colonial America. Drafted in July 1776 by Thomas Jefferson to justify a political break between 13 colonies and Great Britain, the Declaration evolved into a foundational document for global human rights discourse across diverse political systems and cultural contexts. The text's ideals outlived their specific political origins, demonstrating remarkable portability across cultures and historical periods. This transnational impact is powerfully illustrated by Marxist leader Ho Chi Minh, who directly quoted the Declaration's preamble during Vietnam's 1945 Independence Declaration to mobilize popular support against colonial rule. This example demonstrates how revolutionary texts can be appropriated by movements with vastly different ideological orientations yet find common ground in universal aspirations for self-determination and human dignity. For UPSC preparation, this topic falls under General Studies paper to Constitutionalism and essay paper focus areas, including political philosophy, human values, and the concept of universal liberty. Understanding this historical portability is essential for essays on comparative constitutionalism and the global diffusion of rights frameworks across different societies and legal traditions. From sovereign concessions to inherent human personhood. Prior to 1776, major legal milestones like the Magna Carta of 1215 framed civil liberties as top-down concessions granted from a sovereign ruler above to subjects below in a hierarchical political arrangement. This model placed the sovereign as the source of all rights, creating a system where liberties existed at the pleasure of those in power and could be revoked or modified at will. The Declaration of Independence introduced a radical philosophical inversion that transformed political theory fundamentally, grounding rights in the basic fact of being human and positioning them entirely prior to and independent of state authority. This shift represented a categorical change in political philosophy. Rights were no longer granted by governments but were inherent to human existence itself and inviolable by political authorities. The logical syllogism underlying this position is elegant and powerful. Governments are legitimate only when they actively protect natural rights, and consequently, citizens hold a clear, inherent right to change or overthrow any system that fails to do so. This framework transformed subjects into citizens with agency and established the modern concept of popular sovereignty that underpins democratic constitutionalism worldwide. For examination purposes, aspirants must understand this transition from concessive rights to inherent rights as a foundational moment in constitutional history and political thought. Replacing rigid property rights with open-ended aspirations. The intellectual foundation of the Declaration heavily relied on political philosopher John Locke, who defined the three core natural rights as life, liberty, and property in his influential Second Treatise of Government. However, the 1776 draft made a crucial modification, replacing the rigid concept of property with the phrase "the pursuit of happiness." This textual change was profound and far-reaching in its implications for subsequent rights discourse and constitutional interpretation across the democratic world. Unlike property, which functions as a strict, exclusionary legal category with defined boundaries and limited scope, the pursuit of happiness acts as an open-ended aspiration capable of expansion and reinterpretation. It provides an elastic framework that each subsequent generation can fill with new, contemporary content reflecting evolving social values and emerging understandings of human flourishing. This inherent flexibility is what allowed the text to survive and adapt over centuries, providing philosophical grounding to cover expanding modern demands for personal autonomy, religious freedom, gender equality, and the eventual development of the modern welfare state. The key takeaway is clear. Replacing property with the pursuit of happiness created an open-ended aspiration that allowed subsequent generations to expand personal autonomy and rights progressively across different historical periods and social contexts. American Revolution and Democratic Principles. Beyond its philosophical preamble, the Declaration of Independence pioneered an innovative audit model of governance that has influenced constitutional democracies worldwide for over 2 centuries of modern political development. The document dedicated the vast majority of its core text to systematically listing 27 grievances against the British Crown, transforming abstract principles of liberty into documented complaints demanding redress and accountability. This structural choice reflected a sophisticated understanding of political accountability mechanisms. Rather than relying on vague, emotional complaints about tyranny and oppression, the document functioned as an itemized indictment detailing exact violations of liberty, including quartering military forces in private homes and cutting off open international trade without legislative consent. This specific structure cemented the modern principle that a government's everyday conduct and policies can be meticulously documented, objectively measured, and publicly judged against clear constitutional standards. The exam insight here is significant. The audit model shifts the standard of legitimate governance from abstract divine authority to measurable, contractual performance and objective public accountability that citizens can evaluate and enforce through democratic processes over time. The tension between high rhetoric and lived realities. The Declaration of Independence contains a profound inherent contradiction that demands critical examination by any serious student of political philosophy, constitutional history, and the development of human rights. The final draft completely omitted a paragraph condemning the slave trade, allowing the soaring claim that all men are created equal to stand uncomfortably alongside the brutal reality of 500,000 people held in bondage across the American colonies and beyond. This founding blind spot represents one of history's starkest examples of rhetoric failing to match social reality. Despite this massive moral failing that would take centuries to address through subsequent amendments and civil rights movements, the text achieved a crucial rational ground shift in political discourse and legitimacy. By changing its foundational claim from sacred and undeniable to self-evident, the document anchored its arguments in rational logic rather than traditional religious authority that could be questioned or reinterpreted. The core UPSC takeaway is clear. For constitutional democracies today, high rhetoric, paperwork, and documentation cannot outweigh the foundational value of human personhood and dignity. True constitutional rights must be built on the unshakable pillars of equal dignity and equal protection under the law for all citizens, regardless of background, identity, or social status. Thank you for engaging with this comprehensive analysis of the July 2026 UPSC curriculum covering 5 high-priority topics that define contemporary examination requirements. Your dedication to mastering the complexities of public administration, international relations, environmental governance, and political philosophy is what drives quality educational content creation and meaningful learning outcomes. This breakdown has covered India's strategic partnerships with Japan, the multi-domain competition with China, the conservation security of the Asiatic lion, the structural challenges facing marine and dairy ecosystems, and the philosophical foundations of universal human rights with their contemporary implications for constitutional democracies. Each topic was selected for its high probability of appearing in both preliminary and mains examinations, with frameworks designed to help you structure effective answers under examination conditions and time constraints. The integration of current affairs with static syllabus components mirrors the actual demands of the UPSC Civil Services examination, where success requires synthesizing information across multiple domains and presenting coherent analytical perspectives grounded in factual knowledge. To stay ahead in your preparation journey, subscribe now to receive structured summaries of the most complex daily editorials directly. Gain access to model answers, high-yield practice questions, and expert breakdowns designed to maximize your mains scorecard performance. Together, we turn vast syllabus topics into structured knowledge, helping you approach the examination with clarity and confidence. Empower your journey toward success.